my daughter. She pulled everything out her arm. She was bleeding. She pulled out all her IV. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see her mommy. She wanted to see her daddy, and they wouldn't let her do it. No.
She knew what was going on. I think she knew.
Yeah.
She was trying to save herself.
She wanted to get out of there.
Yeah, she did. Wow. Today, we're going to hear from Rebecca Charles Jackson, whose daughter Danielle, a special needs girl, was tragically killed by hospital protocols in 2021 when we were locked down for COVID. Danielle entered the hospital on false pretenses, was experimented on for 41 days, and left in a body bag. It's the kind of story no mother or father wants to hear, and they do not ever want to have their child be in that same situation. This is a story everyone needs to hear. This is a broadly perpetrated fraud, which is why Free Now Foundation added this lawsuit to our portfolio. You'll also hear from the attorneys on the case, Tricia, Lindsay, and Graham Brownstein. They're the ones who are going to share the fact pattern and all the details about this case that you really don't want to miss. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share with anyone you think would be interested in this story. The Alix Mayer Show is sponsored by Mish International, gold and silver specialists since 1963. When you need protection from monetary inflation and leveraged assets exposure, you contact the dedicated people at Mish International. Mish International, a family business, offers true expertise, integrity, reliability, and fair pricing of gold and silver. Visit their website at mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com. Welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. Rebecca Charles Jackson, Tricia Lindsay, and Graham Brownstein. It is my great honor and pleasure to have you today on the Alix Mayer Show, and I cannot wait to get into the details of this lawsuit. And please, everybody, bring a box of Kleenex. This is not a happy topic, but we really need to make sure that justice is served here. So with that short intro, I would like to bring on Rebecca, the mom of Danielle, and she's going to talk to you about why we are doing this podcast today. So, Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you so much, Alix. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Graham. My family are very well educated, and I wanted to have the super baby born in America. And I found out later on afterwards that the insurance company had a lot to do with the way my Danielle birth was handled. I was told I could only have the baby in Franklin General Hospital on the North Shore. And we had complications because the cervix wasn't opening and I had a lot of contractions. So I was in Franklin General all day and they told me to walk, and it was so hot. It was August 4th. And I said, could I just go home and I'll walk and I'll come back in when it comes closer. So I came back, my husband and we came back around 10:30 at night, and right away they induced the labor, they put epidural, and they told me to rest. And around 1 o'clock in the morning, that's when I saw everybody's just coming into the room and chaos. I was like, what's happening? And I remember clearly the resident said, I need to have a C-section. So they said the baby is losing oxygen. In 1993, we didn't have videos to know anything about, delivery or what to do or what oxygen mean. So they removed blood from her head 3 times, and they said it wasn't good the first, second, and third time. She had punctures in her head, and they stopped inducing the labor, and they told me to wait. Next morning, it was horrific because I had no more water, and it was a 3.5-hour labor where they used forceps. And they cut me there and they pulled her out, and she didn't even cry. They never told me anything because this was a group insurance that I was under. And I came back to the doctor. I took her around 7 o'clock at night, they brought her back to me. I never saw her in between. And I tried to nurse her, and right away she wasn't latching on. So the nurse brought a bottle and they started teaching me how to feed her with a bottle. And if anybody knows anything about brain injury, it starts where the baby can't suck. It doesn't have that. So we went on 2.5 years later, when I was going through my separation divorce, I went to church, and that's where I found out something is wrong with Danielle. So for 2.5 years, they never told me anything was wrong. None of the doctors. They never sent her to neurologists. They never sent her for testing, but she kept getting infections, air infections, cold. Very sweet little girl, very sweet. And this is Danielle life. And so we did everything possible to make sure that Danielle has everything she needed. And I started her off at 3 years old at Schneider's getting special ed therapies.
Rebecca, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so you said the inability to suckle was the first indication of brain damage, but what caused the brain damage? And did you see other signs between 0 and 3 that there was something wrong with her brain?
Because they delayed the birth, Danielle lost oxygen. And by losing oxygen, it affects the brain. So around 6 months was when I noticed the other moms who had the babies the same time as I did were not, Danielle was not doing what everybody else was doing. She wasn't sitting up strong enough like the others. She was tiny, 6 pounds, 2 ounces, and she was just like a normal kid, but then you didn't see the same actions as the other children were doing. She wasn't participating as much.
And then you realized when she was 3 that there was a serious problem with her brain.
2.5 years when I was going through my separation. The older woman in church told my boss that, does that young mom know that the baby probably has CP? And I never even heard of the word CP before. I didn't know.
And what does
So I
CP
went,
mean for our audience?
cerebral palsy is a form of oxygen deprivation.
So that's not congenital. That's something that happens to a child at birth.
Yes, yes. Most children, when they suffer the lack of oxygen, they have cerebral palsy, depending on how bad it is.
So did you start to suspect the hospital had done something wrong at that point?
I wasn't sure until I went back to her pediatrician, who was part of the team who worked on me. And I said, for 2.5 years, I'm asking you, what is wrong with my baby? And you tell me, oh, mom, it's just your baby. Everybody baby is different. That's your baby, and he just, and then he told me to leave and don't come back to him.
Really?
So that's,
So you just pressed too
and
hard and he was feeling guilty?
he was an older doctor and told me don't come back.
You're kidding.
No.
So was that a big red flag for you that you were onto the truth?
Yeah, I didn't know about lawsuits or anything like that. So I told my boss' son, and he said, you better speak to an attorney. And that's when the attorney started. And the APGAR scores were high. They rated her very high, although she never cried when she came out. She was stuck in the canal literally for 3.5 hours. And they should have done cesarean right there, just take her out instead of from 1 o'clock in the morning all the way till she was born nine something in the next morning. Yeah.
So the hospital was definitely at fault in giving her this brain damage that affected her entire life. And what kind of girl did she turn out to be? I've heard from you. She's incredibly loving. She was productive. Tell us about her.
She loved being with people, and she loved, especially the older people. She gravitated to them. She kissed them, hugged them, sing every morning. You see her pictures at her job. She giggled all the time. She was just so happy. It was a joy for her to be there, and she loved that. She would wait 5 o'clock in the morning for her aide to come home and get her ready to get on the bus to go to work at 7.
You're kidding. That is so cute. Would she would like get dressed and just like patiently wait for you?
She would wait for her aide to come and help her to get ready, but she hated it when she didn't have to work. She would just stay in the bed and like, I don't want to get up. It's like her job was really everything to her. And then taking care of little kids too in a kindergarten, she did that also.
That is so amazing. And I love, there's a picture I saw of her holding a tray in the cafeteria ready to bring the food out to the older people. And it just, oh, it simultaneously warms my heart, but also breaks my heart knowing what happened next. So I'm going to fast forward us to what happened in 2021.
Okay. 2021 was the first year Danielle got to go back out to the summer camp. And one of her aides had a cough and had fever. So Danielle goes to chiropractor twice a week, acupuncturist once a week. She has all her therapies. And the aide took her to the acupuncturist, and she said she wasn't feeling well, so she asked her to check her fever. And I don't want to blame anybody, but at that point, when the aide had a fever, she should have not gone into the room with Danielle, because it's like an hour treatment and then another hour to come home. So whatever virus it was, Danielle started coughing the next day. And that was the Thursday before I took her to the hospital.
And that was
Danielle,
October 2021?
August 2021. She had just turned 28 years old. Her 28th birthday was August 5th. And so she progressed around the weekend. She had very high fevers, coughing, but she was still eating. And we treated her at home. We had antibiotics and everything else to treat her. And my friend's a pharmacist, so he brought stuff for her. And so she didn't have any more fever the following week. I would say it was Thursday night. I got scared because I'm hearing this coughing that I never hear, and she's coughing all night. Daniel's very healthy. She barely gets sick, maybe once a year with a cough, maybe for a cold for like 5 days. Now it's a week, so it's very strange because she takes a lot of vitamins. And they keep telling you to take the pulse ox. So my husband, he's a medical consultant, and we had pulse oxes in the house.
Pulse oximeter, which basically measures the pulse and the percentage of oxygen saturation, approximately.
Yeah, yeah. So I took it, and it was 87, and I freaked out.
That's very low.
Yeah. Yeah, well, now I found out when you have a cold and you have a cough, it does drop the oxygen saturation. So I put on a nebulizer. My friend, the pharmacist, told me just put on the nebulizer, and the oxygen went right back up to 96. And so now I'm worried. Oh my God, I'm worried. And I call my neighbor, who's also a doctor, because our doctor is in Manhattan. And I said to him, I says, Danielle's coughing. I checked the pulse ox. So he called us into the hospital, special privileges, right? Because the hospital was pretty much you can't go in. And he called us in to make sure that I'll be able to stay with her. He was a very kind doctor, a very close friend to us too. And when I went in, that's where they picked Danielle out, and they put a mask on her, and she's talking. Danielle did not want to go to the hospital. Danielle did not want to go. And I said, no, we have to go. So they put a mask on her. They tried to do a swab, and she wouldn't let them because she has very tiny features. And to stick a swab, she kept moving. So they didn't swab her. They came back in the room. They did x-ray. And then one of the doctors, Dr. Sherry Andrews, said to me, Danielle have COVID pneumonia. And we need to keep her just for 2 or 3 days.
Huh. Hold on right there. Had she tested positive for COVID or not at that point?
They said she tested positive, but they never did the PCR. They did another test on her because they couldn't get the swab in her nose.
And on what did they base the pneumonia?
IgG test, yeah.
Oh, an IgG. So just antibodies to the protein, SARS-CoV-2 protein. By the way, audience, IgG antibodies do not mean current infection. It means past resolved infection. IgM would be the antibody that would mean that it was a current infection. So that was a misinterpretation on their part that would benefit the hospital.
So I got scared because I'm thinking pneumonia. I'm not thinking COVID. I'm thinking pneumonia. Then she really need to be in the hospital. So they convinced me that she needs to be here just for a couple of days. That's what they said, just for a couple of days. And they started her with treatments and never discussed with me. They had me sign one document. I don't remember if it was a iPad, but I remember signing for admission. That's all I know I signed. I said, I have to sign this for admission, not for remdesivir. I never even heard the word remdesivir. I never heard the word toximabin, none of that. And they started her in the ER with remdesivir.
Wow. So you didn't know how toxic remdesivir is and that it causes kidney failure in 30% of people who go on it, that it was used against Ebola and deemed too dangerous to use in Ebola patients, but here they are using it for COVID. Okay. So
Danielle was.
They never even informed. There was no informing of any of that. It was a secret. They were secretly administering remdesivir
now,
at that point.
Graham Brownstein, is that legal to secretly administer a drug to someone?
No, definitely not. Especially when you have the patient is a special needs patient, and her mother Rebecca is her guardian and health proxy. And under New York and federal law, the hospital was obligated to fully inform Rebecca and Danielle before administering anything. So,
By the way, audience, Graham Brownstein's an attorney. He's not the attorney of record on Rebecca's case, but he is the lead legal person on the case, pulling together all the resources to make this case happen. So, Graham, I'm so happy you're here, and I'm so happy Tricia Lindsay is here too. She is the attorney of record on this case. We're going to hear from her very shortly. But let's go back to Rebecca and talk about what is happening now in the hospital. So she's on remdesivir. They are still telling you 2 to 3 days, or are you getting an inkling
No,
that might?
2 to 3 days, and Daniel was hungry now. It's like a couple hours later, and they brought her pasta with chicken parmesan, and she ate everything. Daniel has a happy appetite. So they later on that evening they came to bring us upstairs to the COVID ward. They didn't even tell me it was a COVID ward, and the lady said, "Oh no, you can't come." I said, "No, no, no, I have to go. I'm her daughter. I'm her mother. This is my child." So they allowed us to go in, and one of the nurses came in. She said, "Oh, I had COVID too. I'm better now." So I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I treated Danielle for over a week and I didn't get sick. I didn't. None of us were sick. Um, so they told Danielle she have to lay in the bed, and Danielle's very independent. Danielle likes to go use the bathroom, so they say she have to lay in the bed. And now if you have pneumonia, you're supposed to sit up, walk, not be laying flat on the bed. And they had the IV hooked to her, and so every time she needed help, I had to call for someone to help me bring her to the bathroom so she could use the bathroom. That night was tough because it was the first night down in the hospital, and she can't really sleep, and I can't really sleep. And early in the morning, I didn't see the effects of the remdesivir right away. I didn't see it. Next morning, they came in 7 o'clock in the morning for bloods. And I'm like, "Do you have to take blood?" So I'm singing her favorite song, "You Are My Sunshine." And Nurse John, is also singing that. And that's one of the nurses that also is on the case. And I begged the doctor. I said, "Do we have to take blood every day? This is too traumatizing for her." And she said, "Okay, I will speak to them." So Sunday, there was no blood. Daniel ate. Monday morning, I said, "Okay, it's Monday. When are we going to leave? When is somebody going to come and check her lungs or make sure?" It's Monday. She wants to go home. I want to go home. And she said, "Okay, I'll talk to the doctors." So around 2 in the afternoon, Fazam Ramanu came in. That was one of the main doctors. And he came in and said, "I want you to sit down," with a solemn face. And I'm like, "Okay." And he just went over to Daniel and came back and said, "Oh, we have to move her to the ICU for observation." There's just a small window in this door. So, but when she's in ICU, we'll be able to see everything. She'll be on glass and we'll be able to observe her.
So they're trying to sell you on it, but was there a medical reason to put her in the ICU?
No, no.
No medical reason.
He just told me for observation.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you allowed her go to the ICU because it seemed like a better place for her to be for observation purposes.
Yeah. Thinking we would go home.
Why did you think he asked you to sit down before he told you that he was going to move her somewhere better?
I realized that's his pattern. That was his pattern. Every time he wants me to believe it's bad, things are really bad, he would always come in with a solemn look and say, "I need to sit down. I need to talk to you." But Daniel this is Monday. So she's in the hospital 3 days, getting 3 days of remdesivir. I think one of the days they give out 200 milligram dose of the remdesivir, like twice the amount. And they had her on a mask, a breathing mask. Now Danielle don't like anything in her face, anything on her nose. It's so she keep pulling it out, and but that was the only reason they told me. So I agreed. I agreed. I trusted. I agreed. And when they brought her to the ICU, it was around 5:30 or so, 6 o'clock. They took off her pajamas, and she likes her pajamas. We just bought new pajamas for her. She loves her pajamas, and they put on a hospital gown. And then they put a bedpan, and she started crying. She's like, she don't use a bedpan. She wants to use a bathroom. And the nurse said, "No, she has to use a bedpan." And So I had to convince Danielle to try to use a bedpan, honey. Try to use a bedpan. I'm sitting with her all the time. And then they brought food. I remember that Monday they had lamb chops. And Danielle liked to eat. I gave her my food to eat too. So she ate all her lamb chops. She ate all my lamb chops. And she had a meal. She was eating, drinking, and I'm up. So she's up in the night because there's a lot of noise. And I guess everything they were doing to her was like restricting the breathing by the remdesivir also, it started flooding the lungs. And she was having problems. So I remember they coming in one night saying she has to keep it on her nose. She has to keep the oxygen on her nose. And then there was a whole bunch of machines with fluids on it. They never told me what it was. So I'm thinking it's antibiotic, it's for the pneumonia. I'm not thinking to check to see it's fentanyl or it's propofol. I'm not checking these things. I don't know. I'm just blindly trusting.
Hold on. So it was fentanyl and propofol, which are
Well, those things started later on. Before was just yeah. Sorry. They started with like 3 machines. It didn't have fentanyl then. It had it afterwards when I came back. I'm sorry. I remember with 2 or 3 machines, and she always had this constant IV tube in her hand, in her arm. So Tuesday morning, Ramanu came in and sat down again with that same face, and he said to me, "We need to put on the ventilator."
and did you question it, or did you think, oh, this
Yeah.
is just the next thing? Or you were starting to
Yeah.
realize that they were pushing things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In less than 24 hours, he sat down and he said, "I need to talk to you. We need to put on the ventilator." I said, "No, she's not going on the ventilator." I was very adamant. She's not going on the ventilator. I started to get really sick. So she ate lunch. That was Tuesday. Dinner time, the chicken nuggets to give, I think it was a little too hard. I was thinking it was a little too hard, but she didn't really eat much dinner time. And a night, very late into the mid mornings, I remember getting some fruit and I fed her some fruit. She ate that. And finally, she fell asleep. And this is Wednesday morning early. I said to the nurse, Ivan, could I please go home, shower, and I'll be back. I live 8 minutes away. He said, "Yes, you could go home. You could go home." So I took all the dirty clothes. I kissed her, and my husband came and picked me up. And within 2 hours, I got a phone call. I can't come back into the hospital. I will be removed from the grounds if I enter the hospital until I have a negative COVID test.
But you're not only her mother, you're her guardian because she's special needs. That should have been an exception, right?
That should be an exception. If I'm not there, they should have provided someone to be with her.
And they didn't do that.
No.
Okay. So now you're separated from Danielle and she's been ventilated.
No, she wasn't ventilated as yet.
Okay. And when were you able to get back in?
About, I think it was September 13th or 14th.
So how long was it that you were barred from the hospital to be by her bedside?
13 days until I get a negative COVID test, yes.
13 days.
Yeah.
13 days. She had no caretaker by her side, a special needs girl being medically experimented on.
Yes. So they call me again and I call and I ask, "How Danielle doing? Could you give me the iPad?" So I sent my iPad. I sent balloons for her. I sent flowers for her, and they refused to take it upstairs to her. When my husband was bringing everything, yeah.
Because I know that flowers, they're worried about infection, which I think is kind of bizarre. Maybe there's something to it, but balloons are harmless. Balloons are usually allowed in the ICU, and they denied that. So you're just feeling totally shut out as her mother and caretaker. And this is unacceptable. I mean, this is egregiously bad. And so finally, after 13 days, you get back in the hospital, and are you shocked to see what she looks like at that point?
Very much so, but just before they vented her, they called me the next day and tell me we have to put her on restraints because she's taking out her IV. So they tied her to the bed. She can't see me. She can't talk to me. They told me the iPad in the hospital doesn't work. So I can't see Danielle, and Danielle's biggest fear all her life was to be alone. She doesn't want to be alone. And pretty much seeing a child like that tied to a bed alone, and nobody's coming to take care of her. Nobody's coming to comfort her. Nobody's coming to feed her. because the medical records show that she had malnutrition. And Danielle always made sure Danielle always get food, and to read that in the medical records was so hard. So they call again. They told my doctor, the neighbor next door, to call him. They keep calling him to push us to put her on the ventilator. And I said to him, I said, if this was your child, would you put her on a ventilator? And he said yes.
Oh,
So this was Saturday. And I keep trying. They did not let me speak to Danielle. Only had one opportunity to see her. I think it was Friday night, just for a second on an iPad. She couldn't even talk. She just was just staring at me. I don't know if they threatened her and tell her you can't say nothing, but Danielle usually talk, and Danielle didn't talk. She just looked at me. So and also she pulled everything out her arm. She was bleeding. She pulled out all her IV. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see her mommy. She wanted to see her daddy, and they wouldn't let her do it. No.
she knew what was going on. I think she knew.
Yes.
She was trying to save herself.
She wanted to get out of there.
Yeah, she did. Wow.
So that week that I was away, I was doing everything. I was talking to him, and I was telling him that, I fought the system before. My daughter is going to live. And he never had anything positive to say, nothing positive. And then I was hearing about Ralph Laringo, who was getting people on ivermectin and getting them off the ventilator. So I hired Ralph Laringo, and I believe it was September 10th, the following Friday, I was able to court order that said to immediately administer the ivermectin.
Really? You got a court order to do that? That was brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, and then what happened at the hospital? Did they give her ivermectin?
Well, my friend who's a pharmacist, he drove from Manhattan and he brought the ivermectin. They refused to use his ivermectin. They said they have to use a hospital ivermectin. So this is Friday night, and I'm like, did she get the ivermectin? And they say it's in the legal department.
No.
Yeah.
It's a court order.
It's a court order, but I have to go to the legal department because I threatened him. I said, it's even written in, he wrote it down in the medical record that a mother is going to get ivermectin and she's going to get a court order.
Wow. And you got the court order, yet they still wouldn't do it. So did she ever get the ivermectin, Rebecca?
I think she got it for maybe 2 days or 3 days. I have to check again. I came back the Monday, and she was on her stomach, swollen. And I'm like, I ran into the room and it told me I have to come out and put on PPE again. And her whole body just swollen, and blood here and dry blood here and everywhere to put the central line. And she had black and blue marks all in her arms. And I remember when they turned her around, she had the chin was scarred and the eye was scarred, and I found that that's a ulcer, a pressure ulcer. They must have left her on her stomach for too long that caused a pressure ulcer on her eye and her chin.
Unbelievable. So she looked like a completely different person and totally different from the Danielle you left when you had to go home because you were sick.
Yeah. And Danielle got a heart attack from the medical record 2 days after they put her on the ventilator. And they never told me.
That's what caused the heart damage, the ventilator.
The ventilator and the drugs. They were pumping her full of fentanyl. They shot her with morphine. I believe it's either morphine or midazolam. I have the record. They shot her with that to drop her oxygen level so they could justify putting her on a ventilator that Saturday morning.
They manipulated her vital signs with drugs to justify a ventilator.
Yes.
Unforgivable. So, Rebecca, I know this is so hard. How long were you back in the hospital before she passed?
About, if I said it right, Danielle, I came back on September 13th. Danielle passed on October 6th. They knew I wanted her to come home for my birthday. I mean, there were many things that added up, what they were doing, what I was noticing. And he told me that how we have to take her off the ivermectin because it's causing liver damage. She has liver damage from the ivermectin, and I have to stop it.
I actually don't think that's true about ivermectin. I think that at high doses over the long term, I think it can cause some kidney stress, but I'm not aware of it causing any liver damage. But I could be
So
wrong.
he called me around to show me the computer that shows her liver enzyme went up. And that's when I knew about remdesivir. And I said, it's the remdesivir that caused that.
There you go.
And they all stayed quiet. And when I was at home and I couldn't come back and I found out about remdesivir, I said, do not give her any remdesivir. He was like, oh no, she already got 10. Very casually, like she already got 10. Very psychotic too, the way he spoke. So he even came in the room when I was there and told me, I have nightmares about your daughter.
Why do you think he said that, Rebecca?
Now I know.
Why?
Now he knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And why was he doing it? What was his motivation? Does it have to do with the PrEP Act and reimbursements?
I believe it was blood money. That's all I could call it. After I been hearing all the stories after Danielle died, it was the same thing. Yes.
And so Danielle was on Medicare. Did you feel like things took a turn for the worse at about the 15 to 20 day mark? I'm trying to put the timeline together because I've heard that once the Medicare payments for the hospital stay end, that hospitals, when we were locked down and under the PrEP Act protections, were pretty much letting patients go at that point or accelerating their demises because they weren't getting the Medicare payments for the hospital stay.
Danielle had Cigna PPO. She had private insurance, which they billed 600 and I believe 658 or $648,000. And I don't know how much the bill for the Medicaid.
Wow. So the hospital received $640,000 in revenue from the Cigna PPO, and then there was additional revenue from Medicaid. So the hospital maybe made $1 million off of Danielle?
Yeah, and then if you give remdesivir, the hospital gives the Medicaid give you CMS gives you 20% bonus on top of the hospital bill once you give remdesivir.
We don't have access to any Medicare or Medicaid billing records, so not as of now. So we don't actually know any amounts that the hospital may or may not have billed to those entities. To be clear.
Well, we're going to move on to the case really soon. I assume that those are going to be subpoenaed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was on CMS in 2021. That's how I found out that there was a 20% bonus on top the hospital get once they give remdesivir, just like the bonuses for the COVID test, the bonuses to go to the ventilator. So there was an incentive to, and it had to have COVID on the death certificate too.
Of course. Yeah, to get more payments. We know so many of our listeners understand the relationship between health freedom and our personal and economic freedoms. It's the same principle. If you're one of our audience who's concerned about inflation, paper asset crises, and ongoing monetary crises, you may have already started accumulating gold and silver or are considering doing so. There's no gold dealer we know who's better positioned to serve the freedom community than Mish International in Menlo Park, California. I'm one of the many happy customers who's purchased gold or silver in their showroom, or I've had it delivered through their secure courier service. They are true veterans who are honest, fair, and reliable, and so knowledgeable regarding all the choices of gold and silver bars and coins to help you choose the products that fit your goals and your worldview. The principal, Robert Mish, is world-renowned for his expertise in rare coins as well. Write down this number, 650-324-9110. That's 650-324-9110. And visit mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com to learn more about this notable company. So do you feel like they were looking at any patient who came in those days as a revenue target, or was there something specific about Danielle and being on Medicaid that, made their pupils turn into dollar signs?
Well, Northwell Health Hospital and the CEO of Northwell Health in the past, he have saved New York State billions of dollars in Medicaid money. I believe one was 10 billion, next year was 12 billion. And if you look at Medicaid patients, how do you save New York State Medicaid money and you have a hospital? I'm just putting that out there.
I follow. I'm sure our audience follows that as well. So, well, let me fast forward you to her last day, and then we'll start talking about the lawsuit. Unless this is too much, do you want to stop here, or do you want to talk
No,
about?
I think you talk about the lawsuit.
Okay, let's switch to the lawsuit then. So, all right, so Rebecca, I'm going to stay on you for just a little longer, and so Danielle passes away after 40-ish days in the hospital, and you're starting to get legally savvy at this point based on what happened to her in the hospital at birth and needing to get a court order for the ivermectin. And so I'm sure you go through a massive grieving cycle. And then at some point you decide you should definitely do a lawsuit, right?
Yes. I knew right away when she died that, and I will tell you about that later on. My husband and I, we went wrong, and I said, please get the medical records. So I knew something was wrong. I knew it's just the way they treated me and the way they treated Danielle was not like a human being, was not like a patient. They did not treat her like a patient. And that's when I started doing all the research, but I did not know exactly, I did not have any proof that, you know, until the nurse read the records. But I knew in my heart, so I started to join different groups and hearing the same story. Their loved one went in, they got locked out, they died, it was on a ventilator, they didn't even get to see them, the body was either burned, they never got the body, you know. So now I'm realizing, oh my God, this is really happening. It wasn't just, I wasn't just suing a person. So I started calling attorneys literally 1 week after I could pull myself together. I started calling attorneys, and no attorneys wanted to take the case.
Really? Why wouldn't an attorney want to take this case?
First of all, the fact they said that how, oh no, we don't take COVID cases. Even Aaron Siri said they don't take COVID cases. All the famous attorneys in New York don't take COVID cases. And many of them hung the phone up on me and said, well, she was special needs. There's no money to get out of this. I said, it's not about money, it's about justice. And there's no money. She had no children. She wasn't married. She didn't have a job, a paying job to actually to have a settlement, because for them it's about the money, it's about the settlement, how much money they could get. So as far as Danielle's life was valued in their eyes, it was zero. And I feel like the whole system, if you have special needs, even though if they cause it, your life is zero. It's worthless to them.
Wow. So yeah, so all the attorneys, they feel like they need to get paid, and so they want a big settlement or judgment so that they can get reimbursed for their legal work. But that's why our nonprofit law firm exists, because we don't do lawsuits like that. We never share in any judgment or settlement fee. We do these because there are broadly perpetrated frauds, which is what this is.
Mhm.
So what was the first positive phone call you made where you felt like you finally got some traction?
There was no positive phone call until the night before my lawsuit, my deadline for the statute is going to expire. 3 days before, I says, I have to file pro se. I just couldn't just let it go. I could not let the statute expire like everybody else's. And I put together with a friend of mine and filed, not knowing how to file or how to write the document, file with every single name that the nurse pulled out that said this was involved, this person was involved, this person. So altogether it was 44 defendants I filed against.
Gosh, and you did this pro se, which for our audience, that means you're representing yourself. You had no attorney who would take the case. So you just went ahead and got it in under that statute of limitations guidelines, deadline, sorry. Wow. And okay, what happened next? Did something happen with the case next, or did you come to meet Tricia and Graham next?
Well, Tricia and Graham is by the grace of God, because I've been out there speaking, writing, begging everyone for help, still calling all the freedom attorneys. Nobody wants to take it. And finally, Sasha Latapova and Catherine Watts messaged me about Graham. And then Graham and we had email conversation back and forth. And then Graham introduced me to Tricia. And it was like the light at the end of the darkest tunnel, because it was getting hopeless. It was getting really hopeless. And they were telling me I have to do depositions, and I'm like, I can't do this. If I have to do this, I have to walk away, because there's no way I know how to do this.
Okay, so that brings us up to almost the present time. And so Tricia Lindsay and Graham Brownstein, you're both attorneys. Would you like to talk about stepping into this case?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And Rebecca, thank you for doing that again. I know how hard it is. Yeah, I got approached by Sasha and Catherine, as Rebecca just said, and I actually at the time thought Rebecca already had counsel because there's just too many of these going on, and I was mistaken. And so when I heard that she did not have representation, and within they sent me the stuff, I could see that this was an important case. And as soon as Rebecca and I spoke, I decided to do whatever I could to try to make something real happen here. And it was actually my wife who recommended Tricia, and it was Kevin Jenkins, who I had worked with previously on COVID fights. Kevin connected me with Tricia, and that's how this effort was born.
Well, I know, let me just interject. I know Tricia Lindsay is a badass attorney. I had the pleasure of meeting her a couple times on Zooms that our mutual friend Curtis Cost put together. And it was my pleasure to get to hear her speak about the law and everything she was doing in New York to make things right during the COVID lockdown era. And on a personal note for Graham, he came to me through Children's Health Defense when Free Now Foundation was called Children's Health Defense California chapter. And I just adored Graham from the beginning. He's so full of energy. He's like a jumping jack, and he makes things happen. He actually came in and helped us assemble our original legal team, most of whom we're still working with today. And they are like the winning medical freedom attorneys in California, and we're going to be continuing to win. So, okay, with that out of the way, let's get back to you, Graham. I just wanted to sing your praises, both of you.
Thank you. No, I knew very like when I said yes to Rebecca before I even approached Tricia, I was thinking I'm gonna have to talk to Alex about this case. So, so anyway, yeah, the thing that for me really became the aha moment was when we did the deep dive on the facts on what actually happened, and it was very clear that this was a fraud case, that they just had been lying to Rebecca and Danielle from the get-go, and that really there was no good reason why Danielle should have ever been admitted in the first place. And so everything that then happened after that was completely avoidable. Danielle should have been sent home. So once we determined that, that really then guided how we developed our strategy going forward, which was essentially to try to figure out how can we get this court to take a look at this case through a different lens. Instead of a traditional medical malpractice lens, which is how Rebecca, as representing herself, she did the best job she could, and actually she did a really good job drafting her complaint, but she didn't use the buzzwords, right? She didn't use the right legal terms of art. And so the judge, when a judge is taking in a pro se litigant, a plaintiff who's representing herself, as Rebecca was, the judge and the court are supposed to interpret that complaint in the light most favorable to the plaintiff, because this is not a lawyer who has drafted this complaint, and so they're not supposed to know all of the right words. So there needs to be an extra careful reading done of the complaint, and it's clear that that never happened. In fact, reviewing the record, it's a mess. The procedural record is a mess. The only substantive ruling from the original judge, we're now on Judge 2 in this case. The initial judge was a judge named Judge Kapoor. That judge, early on, end of 2024, so just months after Rebecca has filed her complaint, that judge, based on motions filed by the defense counsel, proposes a judgment dismissing Rebecca's complaint against 38 of the original 43 defendants that Rebecca sued.
Why would that be the initial step to let all those defendants go? Why would that be dismissed?
Because the defense counsel for those 38 of the original 43 defendants, which includes Northwell Corporation and Northwell Hospital Glen Cove, and then 38 nurses and doctors, those defendants were all being represented by the same attorney, the same law firm, and that law firm filed a motion, several actually, motions to dismiss, highlighting for the court the procedural defects with Rebecca representing Danielle's estate, as well as attempting to make arguments that really were not good legal arguments about statutes of limitation. And
so for the lay audience, so all procedural arguments and technicalities,
these were procedural arguments to try to get the case dismissed.
Yeah, nothing having to do with the merits of the case, which we all know are there. But they don't want to get to the merits, right?
That's right. No, there's nothing about the merits. They're just saying she doesn't have standing to bring this case. And the main rationale that they kept harping on was that Rebecca, as a pro se litigant, again, a plaintiff representing herself, under New York State statute, Rebecca is not allowed to also represent the estate of her daughter, Danielle. There are some reasonable rationales for that don't really apply in this case, but regardless...
Because it could be a conflict of interest, right? Because somebody could benefit from the estate.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But they hung their hat on that. The judge used that statutory limit to dismiss the case. That was the primary rationale in this proposed dismissal judgment. Dismissing Rebecca's complaint against these 38 defendants was because Rebecca's not allowed under New York law to represent the estate of her deceased daughter. Now, once we get retained, once Tricia is now the litigator on this case as a New York attorney, our first filings, every keyed filing going forward, including all of our motions, say to the court, Your Honor, Rebecca now has representation. So the primary defect that you identified in your proposed judgment has been cured. So the judge just ignored this entreaty repeatedly. No matter how many times we asked the court to tell us, now that Rebecca has counsel, Your Honor, how do you want us to file an amended complaint against all of these original defendants? Never got the question answered. So early last month, we went ahead and filed, and this is a good opportunity to segue to Tricia, we went ahead and filed our first amended complaint on Rebecca's behalf under the proper New York State statute, which gives us authority in the absence of any direction from the court to go ahead and file an amended complaint against all of the original defendants.
Okay, so you're pulling all those defendants back in.
Yes.
Okay, so this amended complaint was also reframed no longer as a medical malpractice lawsuit, but as a willful misconduct lawsuit, which is the only thing that will pierce that legal protective veil of the PrEP Act. Is that right?
Yes. The first thing that we did, Alex, when this case came and we realized what had happened, we went to curing the procedural defects, strengthening the pleadings, and expanding the case. That's what we decided on. That's what needed to occur. And so my entering the case as now the attorney for Rebecca cured the defect that the judge named in her or mentioned in her order. And so we thought that we were in a good position, right? And I still think we are in good position. It's just that we're going to just have to keep fighting because the court is not operating the way that it's supposed to. Procedurally, they are taking steps whereby they are ignoring certain pleadings that we have put forth. I'll let Graham pick up and then I'll chime in at times.
Let me just double click on something you said, Tricia. The thing that you cured that was the procedural problem is that she was representing herself. And so you came in and now you're representing her. And so that's no longer the procedural problem, right?
Right. Absolutely.
It's pretty basic.
We also highlighted that the other arguments that the defense has made about statutes of limitation do not apply here based on the reframing.
And they were also claiming that they weren't served correctly. Some of the defendants were, which is not true.
Which was complete nonsense. So there were several really specious arguments made by defense counsel. We responded to all of them very strongly. There's virtually no case law that supports their arguments that we could find. I mean, we really thought, okay, we're going to get this amended complaint in, and we're going to be able to consolidate and get all of these defendants back in one case under this new amended complaint, which is why it was so shocking when a few weeks after we filed the amended complaint, the court went ahead and affirmed that proposed dismissal judgment against those 38, now 37, because one of them is deceased, defendants. So
I think defense counsel realized what was coming, and so they filed motion to the court to issue judgments to pretty much confirm the judgment of the court the year before, dismissing all of the 38 defendants. And the court, instead of holding on that and ruling on our motion to amend the complaint and looking at our amended complaint, went around that, ignored our request, and granted the defense counsel's request, and pretty much affirmed the dismissal of the 38 defendants.
Why does the court seem to be protecting the defendants? That's not their job.
Well, you have to consider the entities that we're dealing with, and I'm just real. If anyone knows me, I'm real. So if you don't want to hear real talk, don't ask me. But we're dealing with Northwell, right? Where the long reach of that institution, and we know what took place during COVID. We know all the financial incentives that were, connected to COVID and things that occurred. And so I don't know where the court's stance is on this, but it just seems very odd that they would ignore a pending motion that was briefed, and go around it and respond to issue a ruling on the defendant's motion, which pretty much would be affirming and leaving out the 38 defendants, despite the fact that we cured the defect and we now have an expanded an expanded complaint that is solid, cures the defect, expands the matter, addresses all the deficiencies, and yet the court ignores it. So I don't know what the court's position is and what's happening. I can speak to Northwell, and I think what that institution is about. But somehow, some way, something has been misconstrued. But we are not backing up. We are here, and there are other avenues that we have, on the side, and we're waiting to use them, and we are going to use them to keep this case alive and to achieve justice for Rebecca and Danielle. This is something that cannot be ignored, and whatever avenue we have, whatever remedy we need to use to get that justice, we're going to do so because the law allows it, and there are avenues to explore, and we're going to do that.
I fully believe that, which is why we took this case under our portfolio. So, and the case is going to get justice for Rebecca and Danielle, but it's even bigger than that. This would be the first case that pierces those PrEP Act protections for this hospital experimentation that they do. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. It is big because Danielle is not the only one, as we know. She's not the only one.
So a lot of people are skeptical about this case. Like, I can't tell you how many people came up to me when we took this case into our portfolio and they said, oh, well, the Grace Shara case, that lost. So why do you think this one's going to be successful? And I think that's an easy answer. I'll toss it to the attorneys.
So I think there's two main answers that are relevant here. We don't think that traditional medical malpractice arguments really make sense here as the be all end all framing legally, given that this is fraud, right? They lied to Rebecca and Danielle initially and then repeatedly thereafter. So the way we've tried to redraft this complaint is to really highlight how in each of the 12 claims that we've now outlined in the amended complaint, we've really tried to highlight how each of these claims does not fall within the PrEP Act's immunity provisions, given the originating fact of fraud, fraudulent inducement to admittance. Everything flows from that. Every single thing that happened to Danielle and Rebecca flows from that initial lie. So we really go to great lengths to try to tease that out by pointing to key bits of the fact pattern, key bits of the medical records that support that framing. That's number one. And number two, I would say, we're not looking for money. We're not a win for us is not settling with anybody. A win for us is exposing what actually happened to Danielle. So we're not positioning ourselves to get into a settlement negotiation with Northwell. We're positioning ourselves to expose what Northwell did to Danielle, whatever that takes, whether that happens in this court or has to happen in another court on appeal. Our goal is to grind this out and expose this for as long as possible so that as many people as possible learn about what really is going on inside Northwell. Period, full stop.
And a win in this case would mean a stop to these predatory hospital practices that are normally protected by the PrEP Act, and probably predatory practices outside of the PrEP Act, correct?
Ideally, yes. I mean, that would be wonderful. If we can get to that day, that would be wonderful. That would absolutely be our ultimate ideal goal. Yes. So as I alluded to earlier, there is the entire procedural record is off, is odd. It's weird. The judge's ruling dismissing against the 38 has no real legal logic in it. It's just a bunch of word salad and cites to statute and then a decision, but it doesn't tie together in any logical, rational way, because the only rationale for the dismissal is that Rebecca is a pro se litigant who can't represent Danielle's estate. Well, that logic should apply to all 43 of the defendants, not just the 38. So what's the distinction? Those 38 are represented by the same law firm. The 5 did not have any representation at the time in late 2024. They now all do, but they didn't at the time that the initial proposed dismissal was drafted. So that's not a reason to actually, there's no real reason here. It's just like things are happening and the court's making decisions, but there's no real legal logic behind any of it. So I just wanted to highlight that. We have 38 defendants, again, 37 because one has died. A young nurse is deceased, or PA, physician's assistant, I mean, thank you. So it's 37 who've now been dismissed, but the operative facts are the same that involve them as the 5 who remain, who are now we're about to go into discovery with and have take depositions from. So as Tricia said, one way or another, we're either going to get the judge to stay and vacate this dismissal, or we're going to appeal it and fight it out and then get it back in under a consolidated complaint against all of them in one proceeding. But in the meantime, we're going to have these 2 parallel tracks while we fight it out and figure out how we're going to get the 37 back in.
As they say, discovery's a bitch, and depositions of the 5 will lead also to bringing back in the now 37. But the 37 should be let back in just based on the merits of the fact that they're the same as the 5.
Yeah. Yeah, they were letting me do discovery. I mean, the depositions on these five for the same reason that they dismissed the others. So it's like what Graham is saying. How is that? How did they get away and these got stuck? And and the hospital took all the service for them.
Well, it sounds like they've got some big muckety muck law firm that's been wheeling and dealing behind the scenes to cut a deal.
The biggest law firm for medical malpractice and one of the oldest.
Oh, very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, Martin Clare Waterhouse. Probably when you put up the podcast, you put that law firm there.
Sponsored by Martin Clare Waterhouse, right?
So right now, so you're on this parallel path trying to bring back those other now 37 defendants, and you're doing discovery with the 5 that are still qualified as defendants. And what's the next step here?
Our next steps is to proceed with discovery on the current pending matter while we're waiting for the court to give us guidance with regard in response to our letter that I filed with the court. And I can say we will definitely be filing our notice of appeal to preserve our appellate rights just while we await a response from the courts. So the big push right now is to get this story out, because our hope is that the court will grant our motion to amend the complaint, and in doing so, it will bring back in the additional 37 defendants, which now means that this case goes from expensive to, I can't even give you the dollar amount. Because depositions are extremely expensive, as we know. Anyone who's been involved in a lawsuit, depositions are very expensive. And when you're talking about a case such as this, which is so complex, there are thousands of pages of medical documents. Defendants they're going to fight. They have a war chest behind them. And so, we're going to need to depose as many defendants as we can. That makes sense. But discovery, I can see them burying us in paper, sending over discovery and burying us to try to shut us down. And when you talk about motions, they're going to file motions to dismiss, multiple motions to dismiss. So we have to be prepared for that. And then it will come in the summary judgment motions. And they'll more than likely file multiple ones to bury us again, so that we're having to respond to multiple motions. So we have to be prepared for that. We cannot take it lightly. We cannot assume that they're just going, even though we're not lining ourselves up for settlement. We can't even assume that they're going to allow us to line up for that, because in their minds, to even settle means a loss for them, right? And so they're not going to want to do that. They're going to want to crush this story. They're going to want to quash it and let it go away, because it kind of opens up. No, it doesn't kind of. It does open up Pandora's box for all the other families that have been through this. And so they don't want that to occur. So we have to build our own war chest. We have to be prepared for whatever is to come. And so we need the public to be aware of what's happening. We need the righteous medical community to be aware. We need everyone on this spreading the story and helping as much as possible, because this is not just about Rebecca and Danielle, but this is about all of us. And we're in this fight together. And that's why I took the case, because when I heard the story, I as much as I wanted to say, no, I cannot, I don't even have room to do it. I had to make room. And because it's justice that has to be served, and it could be any one of us, any day. We all have family members. We're here. It could be any one of us. I wasn't feeling well the other day, and I had family members who asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital. First of all, I was shocked that I was sick, and it took a lot for me to even admit that I wasn't feeling well, because being a former educator, I have an ironclad immune system. But I've been doing so much, I think I wore down my immune system. And but when they asked if I wanted to go to the hospital to get checked, I said, "Oh, sure, perfect." They would love for Tricia Lindsay to show up in the hospital.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, absolutely not. That's not happening. But it's a shame that that's the thought that has to come to your mind, that comes to your mind nowadays. Before it was, let's go to the doctor, and they'll take care of us and we'll be fine. And now it's, oh, absolutely not. I go to the hospital. It's not, the chance of coming back home, it's not so great nowadays. And that's not a good situation, but I'm very real about that and I'm very clear on that. And so that's why we have to keep going with this case.
Well, I'm sure grateful that you did not elect to go to the hospital, and increasingly people are absolutely petrified of going to the hospital. And it shouldn't be that way. I mean, it used to be a place where people could convalesce, and now it's not even that. It's like a death watch. But even worse in these cases, it is blood money, as Rebecca said. People are scared of being the next source of blood money for the hospital. I have a friend who wouldn't go to the hospital for years, and now he's actually in a terrible situation with a very advanced case of skin cancer, and he's beyond skin graft. He's probably gonna have to do something called a flap, but he was so scared to go into the medical system. So, and this happens all the time. I have another friend whose husband got in a horrible accident on a motorized scooter. He was on it with a friend or his brother, and he fell headfirst because he passed out. He ends up in the hospital, and I think it was 2022, and he turns into like Rambo in the hospital. And just like Danielle, he pulls out all of his IVs and orders himself an Uber and just leaves, even though he could have had a brain bleed. And people are petrified to be in the hospital now. And the medical system, the public health departments have to understand that this has to change. And if it changes through this lawsuit, all the better, because everything's going to be exposed through this lawsuit. And listen, we didn't take this case because we're this giant nonprofit who has the money to fund another giant case. We don't. We don't. We took this case because we thought that this was such a good fact pattern and the causes of action were so strong. And this is the one case we think could pierce the PrEP Act and change this for everyone, in addition to getting justice for Rebecca and Danielle. So we very much rely on everyone to contribute to this case. Listen to Rebecca's story. Think about being her. Think about being Danielle's mother and watching this happen to your daughter in slow motion, bit by bit, taking bits and bits away from her daughter every day. And then think about if you ever want to be in that situation yourself. And you're the kind of person, if that pulls on your heartstrings, you're the kind of person who should be supporting this case to the extent that you can. We're having a fundraiser in New York City in Manhattan on June 6th, and we're going to be featuring Vera Sharav. It's a Saturday night. It starts at 7:30. There's only going to be 10 guests allowed at that dinner table, and it's going to be an unbelievable conversation. I'm going to be there. Rebecca's going to be there. Tricia's going to be there. And and of course, Vera, and then 10 guests. And so if that is something that is up your alley, if that excites you to be able to talk to Vera Sharav about the commonalities between COVID and lockdowns and all the overreach and the Holocaust, I mean, that's giving me chills just saying that right now. That's somewhere you should think about going. And please get in touch with us at Free Now Foundation, team at freenowfoundation.org if you're interested in that dinner, and we can get you the information on it. Somebody will call you and talk to you about the dinner. That's somewhere you should be. And if you can't make the dinner, and this again is pulling on your heartstrings, I can't even believe the number of people who have stepped up to donate to the case. It's been unbelievable. But as you heard Tricia say, they could be deposing dozens and dozens of defendants. This is going to be an incredibly expensive case, but it is so worth it with the outcome this case is probably going to get to pierce the PrEP Act and stop this predatory practice at the hospitals. So I'll stop there. That's enough of a soliloquy. Does anybody else have anything to say about this case or the importance of supporting it?
Well, I would like to say that George Floyd, we had so much exposure for George Floyd, and George Floyd fentanyl level was about a third of what Danielle fentanyl level was. Danielle was at 50, a fifth.
It was a fifth. George Floyd was at 11, I think, and Danielle was at 53, as I recall. If I remember correctly, milligrams.
I did the toxicology report and the autopsy privately, because when the funeral home director called up Nassau County, he asked, he's like, I never seen a 28-year-old die from COVID. And he's looking at me in shock, and I'm reading him because I'm like, I'm in shock too. And he called, and Nassau County said, if there's COVID on the death certificate, they can't do it. But an ICBA already wrote that my daughter organs, he already put a number for organ
Harvesting.
harvesting. Yes, yes.
Even after everything they did led to her death, they wanted to extract more money out of your daughter like she's a rare earth, and we're just extracting.
Yeah. And I heard that during COVID, the nurses said that they had more transplant operations because they were getting so many organs. So now you know. Now you know. This is worse than China now.
Yeah. Well, and if those organs were usable, even though those people were dying from COVID or hospital protocols, that tells you a lot about how dangerous or destructive COVID actually was. And if their organs are still good, that's a whole nother story right there. Wow.
How could you sell organs that has COVID and COVID killed the person?
Exactly. Wow. Well, this case is going to continue to reveal so many things like that. If you are outraged by COVID and lockdowns and the overreach, this is one of the cases to get behind. This case is going to make things right. This case is going to find justice and prevent something like this from ever happening again. I refuse to be predated on by the system. I refuse to have my family predated on, my friends, my colleagues are here. I don't want anybody to be a victim in the hospital ever again. So this case is super important to me. So, Rebecca, what do you think the best way is to get to the fundraising goal we need to make this case successful? And where can people find information on the case, on what happened to Danielle and all your writings?
I have been writing on Substack. You could find all my stories there. And also for funding, I mean, we have a lot of good donors that could donate more, but if everybody would just commit to $10, 1 million people could commit to $10. We are dealing with one of the largest hospital system, an evil hospital system in New York. Now it's spreading to Connecticut. Do we want that hospital system to go to your state and do what they did to Danielle and everybody else? We had hundreds of thousands of people died in that hospital in the last few years. So I just please ask him, please, just $10. If you could just give $10.
Yep. I think anybody can afford that.
Can I also just make the point? We're not raising this money to pay me or Tricia. I just want to be clear. I mean, if 1 million people give $10, then Tricia and I can get paid. But barring that, we need this money to pay paralegals to actually go through the mountains of paperwork that they're trying to bury us under, and to pay expert witnesses, and to pay the hard costs of depositions. We're already up over 20 grand, just 25 grand on hard costs. This is not like paying attorneys, under standard, even reduced attorneys rates. So I just want to be clear, your money is going to cover the hard costs of litigating this and prosecuting this large roster of defendants.
That's right. And you'll make your donation through freenowfoundation.org. There's a special landing page for this lawsuit. And I'm also not paid. I've been doing this work for 6.5 years as a volunteer because it's so important to me. And so nobody's getting rich off of this. We just want justice, and we don't want this to happen again. So thank you so much to everyone here. I think this has been an incredible conversation. It was painful, and I just think it needs to be had, even though it was painful. And I think people are going to learn a lot from it. And I think there are a lot of people out there who want to see the justice and do not want this to happen again. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Rebecca Charles Jackson, Graham Brownstein, and attorney Tricia Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alix. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
We're so happy to have as our prime sponsor, Mish International, Northern California's acclaimed specialists in rare coins and gold and silver investments. Our friend and supporter, Robert Mish, is the same principal that started the company back in 1963, and he's still there every day with 63 years of experience. He has integrity, reliability, and fair pricing, whether you're buying or selling. When you have business to do with precious metals, you'll always be treated well at Mish International. Call 650-324-9110 and tell Robert that Alex sent you.